Internal rotation is an integral part of hip mobility. Why? Because when you're training internal rotation, you're not just training the muscles, but rather training the joint capsule, which is the deepest structural boundary of the hip. Joint capsule is made of dense connective tissue, primarily collagen type 3, that also makes up your tendons and ligaments. But more importantly, there are mechanoreceptors embedded throughout the capsule, which means then through pressure, load, movement, and stress placed on the capsule, they will be sending information to the brain. When you're working on active range of motion and you create contractions, exposing your hip joint to the stimulus and load, you will also, your motor cortex particularly, will be building a clearer, more detailed map of your hip joint. Because remember, there is no such thing as a squat or lunge in the brain. Your brain only sees certain parts of the body through our wiring, right? Through our nerves. Our hip capsule is innervated through obturator nerve, femoral nerve, superior gluteal nerve. Every other movement of the hip depends on hip rotation. The trouble is that when the hip rotation goes and the movement of the hip deteriorates and gets restricted, there will be consequences. So when it goes, the lower back, the knee, or opposite hip will compensate, and it will happen quietly over the years, and most people have no idea that this is happening. That's why joint mobility assessment is so helpful. Think of the movements, daily movements, like for instance, getting on the bike, like getting on the seat of the bike. When the leg swings over the seat, your hip needs to internally rotate. If the hip is not able to go out there and rotate, you will most likely compensate from the pelvis will tilt, the lower back will rotate and side bend. There will be always a roundabout way to get you there. Consider other movements that from midlife onwards you are very likely to be getting involved in. So squatting to do gardening, reaching under a low shelf, sitting on the ground, playing with your kids or grandkids. Every time you basically lower yourself down, come up, the hip rotation will be present. But not only that, every step you take when you're in the middle part of the gait cycle, when you're walking and you standing on one foot, the pelvis will be rotating on the femur, and that requires at least 10 degrees of internal rotation. Think of cumulative effect of hip restriction. When the rotation is missing, the spine will compensate, other areas will compensate, and then every single rep of a squat that you cannot perform well, multiplied by many times, let's say a day, or many times per week or month, years, and then through the rest of your life. Let's talk for a moment about arthrokinematics, how joint surfaces move one on top of the other. What we have in the hip joint, which is a ball and socket joint, we've got a concave and a convex surfaces. We can talk about rolling and gliding. What happens to the hip, if this is your left acetabulum and that's your left hip joint, and I want to internally rotate the femur, what happens is that the actual femur rolls anteriorly, but the femoral head glides posteriorly, which means that the posterior capsule needs to open and stretch. At the same time, anterior pelvic tilt occurs, and when pelvis adjusts, it provides space for the femur to glide posteriorly. And if the posterior capsule, if those collagen fibers are very stiff, restricted, maybe external rotators, so that posterior part of the hip capsule muscle-wise is shortened, the back of the hip will not be able to lengthen, so that posterior glide takes place. And that may cause anterior pinching. Hip ligaments, those are the thickest ligaments in the body, and they are arranged in a spiral fashion. Those ligaments are in fact regional thickenings of the same capsule. That simply means that the collagen fibers are arranged in a different direction. They're arranged in that way because if they weren't, all those rotational movements would not be possible, but also ligaments add to the hip stability. Internal rotation involves deeper set of tissues and can create that more bone-on-bone feel. So just be aware of it when we going through the drills. External rotation often involves more open packed position because the ligaments are actually unwinding and loosening, while the opposite happens in internal rotation because those ligaments are tightening. All those little deep rotators of the hip are in fact blending with the capsule itself. They are histologically continuous with it. Okay, so they structurally integrated, arranged in a spiral fashion around the femoral neck. So the implication when it comes to training is that hip rotation trained actively against resistance through full range loads the capsule directly, and the muscle and capsule responds together. With internal hip rotation, we are particularly working muscles such as anterior fibers of the glute medius and minimus, tensor fascia lata that extends and controls the tension of your IT band, so-called, so that lateral fascial sheath that connects hip to the knee. But when the foot is planted on the ground and the pelvis moves into creates internal rotation of the hip, adductors have been shown to contribute greatly. So you can see the sweet balance between having hip mobility to protect your lower back, protect your knees, and be able to execute so many movements that are essential in our life and sports. At the same time, those ligaments are there to support the hip. So you may think of people who are hypermobile, connective tissue that is structurally more compliant. It just bends more, stretches more, and simply the ligaments, tendons are looser, more stretchy. And this is often due to collagen gene variant. They may have more range and be kind of bone flexible, but have less structural stability. I'll just throw in my 5 cents, drills that I'm doing myself, and different positions that will challenge internal rotation in neutral, in flexion of the hip, but also in abduction. So you can have good movement variability. You can be exposed to different angles, different intensities, so that you can translate this to daily movements. Always judge by how you feel. If it's a stretch, if it's a challenge, if it's mild discomfort at the end of the range, maybe even cramping sensation at the end of the range, it's appropriate. However, sharp pain, catching sensation, pinching, anything compressive that feels just wrong, just stop, just back off and work in a different way, or work a leg further away from the end range of motion. Let's start with the drills and see which setup works for you.
Okay, step one, passive range of motion. So, few setups to help you create more passive internal rotation. So, guys, first setup, this stretch is serving you to open the posterior capsule and it would facilitate posterior glide of the femoral head. This is kind of like accessory movement. So, we can tackle the deep tissues, also superficial tissues like glute max, so that you've got a little bit more freedom in internal rotation. You can try this variation standing. This is basically internal rotation in a closed kinetic chain with foot on the ground where the pelvis needs to rotate. So think of doing mini airplanes as such and holding that position. And it's not really about feeling the burn at this point, it's mostly accessing that rotation. This supine setup, you will need a dowel or a stick, and you want to ground your pelvis, your sacrum, and your rib cage. Notice how this one foot is on the ground to help me stabilize. I'll be bracing my whole core and focusing on internal rotation of the femur. So I'm doing little end range contractions here. First, let's say 5 second mini contraction, pushing the inner heel that is in contact with the stick, 5 second. Then I'm letting this rest and I'm engaging the opposite part of tissues that will be internally rotating further, trying to lift that calcaneus, that heel off that dowel. And I repeat that 3 times. I'm just showing you a very speedy version. You can also do it seated if this feels more comfortable.
Cool. So what are we targeting here? I'm targeting my left hip. So it means I'm moving my trunk and my pelvis as one unit towards that foot, which means that this thigh turns that way and while my pelvis goes this way. Okay. So I would start by simply holding the position. Give yourself at least 90 seconds on this one so the tissue can respond.
I would definitely not recommend it to every single person. So if you're worried about your knees or you're uncomfortable, you need to modify a bit or use different setups. Now let's move to the meat of that program and improve control. So we increasing active range of motion. First setup, working with a resistance band, guys, in neutral. So you're trying to create that pivot. So the femur rotates inside the acetabulum. And here you will particularly feel the anterior fibers of the minimus and medius and tensor fascia lata. Okay, next one, supine. Again, so it's almost exact copy of what we did with the dowel. So now you're replicating this from zero internal rotation to you going as far as you can. So don't make the band too heavy. The straight leg here, grounding, so your core or back do not move. Third setup, I like this one in particular. Make sure that again you have got enough support for the knee and foot so that whole thigh bone is elevated, so your knee is in front of the hip joint. And you can layer resistance here. And I've got here 3 kilo ankle weight. Careful for compensations from the lumbar spine. We obviously want to focus on hip isolation. And that's a nice way, again, to get to feel those tissues, superficial tissues. And you work slowly through full range of motion, guys. So we're trying to access the capsule, influence the capsule, but it will help you with balance and with just general motions. Now, next one, I'm going to be working bilaterally, both hips at the same time. I also use this setup a lot in my online classes or with clients. So, again, light to medium band. So it allows you to move into your full range as much as possible. And you will need that block between your knees. Okay. I'm showing you a seated variation where you work on one side and see what works better, right? The supine one work abdominals more. You will have to brace. Penultimate setup, guys. So we're back to 90. Lean forwards as much as needed. Use the elevation. You want to be able to access that abducted position. If this area that I'm showing you here is pinchy, then maybe you need to lean a little bit further away from that leg. Like in my case, I would go to the right and forwards. So you get out of end range. And this is pretty good, even if you're not super flexible, but it will target those tissues of anterior fibers of glute medius very quickly. And you may expect even some sudden cramping. And then you know that you're targeting those uncharted waters for the central nervous system. I'm using the block here to make sure that my knee stays at 90-degree angle and I'm not using my hamstrings to bend my knee. Okay, and the last drill. So, guys, we are working in abduction with internal rotation now. So, this is alternative to 1990. If the other one doesn't work for whatever reason, you can try this. And you just need some dumbbells and some blocks so you can set it up properly. And we're trying to internally rotate. So, we're not bending the knee. We are simply trying to rotate the thigh bone forwards and towards the ground. Again, that requires good bracing and stability through your trunk and core.
Feel like that content I've just shared may help someone you know, then please share this message with them so they can benefit as well. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next episode. I'm going to cover another movement of the hip.